house. Yeah, so
Oh,
voilà, that's it,
amazing.
And I work sometimes I don't, and I start this podcast.
Yeah. Well,
So,
tell me about the podcast.
yeah, so I just decided one day, a lot of people told me, instead of you being invited on podcast, why don't you do yours?
Your
And
own.
I started. You're gonna be the fifth episode. I
Oh.
started a channel called DHK TV and a podcast called DHK Show, and that's it really. So I'm just starting, and I have like many other projects, very interesting also, and I would love to have
Amazing.
to share a conversation with you,
Yeah,
Lucy, for the first time
totally.
with each other.
Woohoo!
Great. Bon,
Yay! Oh, I'm really pleased.
welcome to the DHK show. Lucy, we know each other for a long time so far. When was
Well,
the
you came on my podcast,
yeah,
which was 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, when did you come out
three,
of prison?
yeah, 2.5 years ago.
Okay, right. So
So
it was
is
actually quite a long time ago. I
yeah,
mean, I recorded it during COVID and everything, so it was in
yeah,
that time. Yeah.
yeah, it was in 2001, something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, in
yes,
2001.
yeah,
So, but we're going to talk about this, and you're going to say how we met
sure.
actually, and how you invited me on your podcast and how what happened and introduce. So, welcome, Lucy. I would like you to introduce yourself, to say a little bit about yourself, about what you're doing as your charity project, and then we
Mm-hmm.
go on.
Okay, cool. So my name is Lucy Vincent. I am the chief executive of a charity called Food Behind Bars. We have been a charity. It's going to be our 4th year as a registered charity this year, but I have been running Food Behind Bars actually for 8 years. And it started life as a small campaign and a passion project of mine. I wanted to raise awareness around food in prison and the quality of it, which I'm based in the UK, just outside of London. And here in the UK, we're not known for good prison food, put it that way. And so I wanted to highlight that. And, like all things in life, it spiraled. And I find myself today now running a charity. We work with prisons all around the UK, men's and women's prisons, and we run a variety of projects. We teach people how to cook. We train catering managers to try and cook better food. We develop recipes. We grow food in kitchen gardens, and everything that we do is trying to get better food in prisons. Yeah.
But Lucy, how did it start exactly? How did you have this idea of? Did you meet any people? Did you have someone in your family?
No, no.
No.
People are always interested. They're like, "Did you go to prison?" I'm just like, "No." And actually, there's a blog post online about me. It was written years ago, and it said Lucy started the charity after she did her sentence. I thought that's hilarious. Completely false, but anyway, it's on the internet. No, I didn't go to prison. I'd never known anyone who'd been in prison, and my interest in prison was kind of just like everyone's interest, right? Like if there was something on TV about it, I'd watch it. I didn't, yeah, I came from a completely different world, and my background, I trained as a journalist. So at the time, I was working as a writer, inverted commas, because I actually never really made any money from it. And I did a bit of freelance work, and I wrote in some newspapers. And I worked in restaurants. I've worked in restaurants since I was about 14 years old, and front of house. And I'd been working in restaurants for about 10 years, and I'd always juggled that around everything else I was doing. So I was a big food fan. And there was a report that came out in this country in 2016 about prison food. So we have you probably have the same thing. We have an inspector of prisons, it's through the government, and they're there to kind of, act as an independent kind of monitoring body, I suppose. And most of the time they just inspect each prison, right, and report back. And this was a subject. They were looking at food, and they were looking at that in lots of different prisons. And I picked that report up in the press. As a journalist, I was constantly looking for things to write about. And I read it, and it really shocked me. I had no idea what people ate in prison, and the situation didn't sound good. It sounded as though people were eating really poor quality, carb heavy food, not much fruit and vegetables. They weren't eating together. They ate in their cell next to their toilet, and it was having these quite kind of far-reaching effects. So for me, that was like the catalyst. And I had my journalist hat on to begin with. So my first port of call was I began interviewing prisoners, ex-prisoners, which obviously you will know this. The minute you start speaking to people who've actually eaten the food, the topic just gets so much bigger because the inspector's never really going to know what it's like. So that made it more interesting for me. And I began writing. And honestly, it was like my friends were like, why don't you start a campaign? I thought, well, I don't even know what that involves. You know, my brother made me a website overnight. I had no intention of what it was going to be. I never intended to run a charity or an organization, anything like that. I just felt that the topic deserved some attention. And that for me was why I started.
Yeah, but you said that you started to interview people in prison, but how did you get in touch with them? Are you through social media?
I did some digging, and which I was used to, like, you know, in terms of researching pieces, and it's a little bit harder, but I connected with a charity here in the UK called Women in Prison, who put me in touch with, well, a few women, but one woman in particular who I'm actually still in touch with today. She really spoke very kind of eloquently and you know, just in a very real way about how food affected her. Like, she put on 5 stone of weight. She felt shit about herself. She became like lactose intolerant during prison, you know, all these things. And I did a lot of, Twitter was the one back then. It's not really so big now, but Twitter, actually, I managed to really connect with and find people who'd been in prison. And, you know, if they wanted to speak to me about this, most of the time they did, because actually what people don't realize is that food is such a big topic in prison. And people don't really understand that. So pretty much everyone I've ever spoken to really wants to tell me about their experiences because they want people to know about them.
Okay, I understand. Now I understand, but also you realize that there is the prison food, but also there is the canteen, and people can maybe enhance the quality of food and enhance their dishes every day, but they need money. So most of people don't have the money to canteen sometimes and to have like better food, I have to say. So
definitely. And I think it creates a bit of us and them in our prisons. It definitely does, you know, and then what happens is people get in debt and there's bullying and all these things. But, you know, aside from that, canteen is almost a whole topic in itself, right? Because as you know, what's being prepared and what's being made is, you know, pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, but what was your opinion, I would say, about people in jail? You know, you had like some opinion about them. How did you, you know, you were like not scared. I would not say scared. I don't know how to say that in English. You know, you have this.
Of course. Intimidated.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't.
Were you judgmental? Well, that's the word. Were you? No. Okay.
And I put that down to my upbringing a little bit. My mum worked with homeless people, you know, not as her job, she volunteered. So my mum every Saturday night worked at a homeless shelter serving dinner, and I often went to go and do that with her. We used to do it on Christmas Eve and things like that. And, you know, I think my mum is like me, you know, she believes everyone deserves a second chance, and I was brought up with that mentality, and homelessness was her passion, you know, and she used to invite people into the house, and, you know, so I kind of grew up with that mentality. So I was never judgmental. And I think I read that report, and if anything, I felt shocked and ashamed that, you know, yes, these people have committed a crime, but it didn't make any sense to me feeding them crap food. It didn't make any sense.
Yeah, so for you, because most of the people, sometimes they say, yeah, they
Mm.
deserve it, they did some
Mm.
crimes, they deserve it to eat that shit. Sorry to use that word. So they
Yeah.
deserve to eat that shit. Do you think it's the right way to think because it's the public opinion they think like that, and
Yeah.
the politics also they talk to how do you say, they talk in the sense of the public opinion.
Yeah.
Understand
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how
Totally.
to say that.
No, they follow the media, and the
Yeah.
media, that's their narrative, right? Is that they don't deserve it. The newspapers in the UK anyway, they like to paint everyone in prison as a terrible criminal who's done an awful thing. And I'm not taking away the fact that there are lots of people in prison who've done terrible things, but the fact of the matter is most people are in prison for shoplifting, for example. It's not like most people are in prison for murder or rape, and that doesn't explain it. But I think the media paint a picture, and so the public have an opinion. I guess what I would say is that when I first started out, which was 8 years ago, I think I was a bit of an easy target, whereas now I'm part of a charity, and we
Mm.
have a team and things like that. Back then it was just me. I was 25, 24, and I was kind of putting myself out there and saying prisoners should eat better. And I did get a hell of a lot of like abuse whenever I did anything in the media. And the comments would be, like you said, they would be, prisoners don't deserve it. They deserve bread and water. They deserve to be starved. If anything, that just kind of spurred me on more, because I really wanted to change those people's opinions, because they didn't know what prison was like. They didn't understand that maybe feeding people better and maybe people coming out of prison in a better state might stop them reoffending. That's going to affect you. Now I
But if
feel
I'm,
like, yeah, go on.
but sorry, because it's important. If I may say, when you say they get out in a better state, but it's a better physical state, also mind state, because
Both,
people
yeah.
what don't understand, if okay, you do the cigarette ban, you don't give like good quality food, people will get worse, and they will do again, they will get into crimes again, and they will be like more, I would say, comment on dit sorry, how do you say,
Mm-hmm.
they will be more violent, when
Yes,
they get out, and more crazy, I would say.
yeah. Totally. And I actually think the mental health and the emotional side of food in prison, I think that has a bigger impact. So yes, people's physical health is can be damaged or whatever, but I think you're right. And I think people, just looking after yourself, eating well, caring for yourself, feeling good about yourself.
But also, also it's not also the services, the prison services. It's also
Yeah.
yourself. For example, even though
Mm,
you don't eat well, you need to go
mm-hmm,
to the gym. You need to work
mm.
out a little bit, to make your body works. You understand? So I think it's a bit of everything. So
I think
people
so. And I
cannot
think,
only.
yeah,
Pardon?
I think there's people in prison who, I think probably this is what you were like, Danny, and I meet these type of people all the time who they're like, this is my environment, this is where I'm going to be for the next however long, and I'm going to make most of it. Like, it's shit, but the only way I'm going to pass my time is if I keep busy, and I
Yeah.
see these people. I've been at people's cell door, and they've got this lovely organized cell, and they've got music going, they've got their food cooking, and they're going down to the gym, and they keep themselves. And there's other people who struggle, and then there's people who are the absolute opposite of that. They're almost self-destructing a little bit. So I agree with you. I think it's the self-responsibility and responsibility on the prison.
So you started the charity Food Behind Bars. You
Mm-hmm.
start to write about it as a journalist. You had, I would say, fellow journalists that they were against you also. They were kind of bullying you a little
Mm-hmm.
bit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because, they had another idea or another, I would say, agenda,
Mm-hmm.
So when did you start to get into prisons, to get into
Yeah.
HMP, to visit the premises, to
Yeah.
meet, to talk with the people? How did it start exactly?
So it happened all quite quickly, and I put myself out there. I wrote a couple of articles. Then I got contacted by the BBC, who invited me to come on a politics show that was broadcast live every day. And I was like, my God. So I hadn't even been into a prison at this point. It's actually really funny in hindsight. And I went on and I debated this topic with MPs. Yeah. And that was huge because obviously it was like prime time BBC telly. I say prime time, it was like mid-morning, but you know, lots of people watched it. And that was huge for me. And the minute I did that, I then started getting contacted by prison governors who had seen it. And I mean, good on them, to be honest. Like, I didn't really have any track record and whatever, but they started contacting me, you know, a couple to begin with, and said, you know, what you're talking about is true. And food is one of the biggest issues in my jail, and people don't realize it. And do you want to come in and see for yourself? And all it took really were a couple of people initially to do that. And then obviously you get connected to other prisons. And, you know, then I guess I got a bit more confidence to start contacting other prisons myself. And, you know, to be honest, most people in those early days were very keen for me to come in and learn. I did get a bit of hostility, understandably, from catering managers in particular, who were like, who the hell is this girl? And why is she telling us to make better food? Which in hindsight, like, I don't blame them for that. But yeah, some people opened the door for me, and that opened more doors for me.
But you understand, Lucy, you understand that it is not the I would say it is not the warden that organize the menu. They call a company that is in charge of delivering the food and making the food for the prisoners. But this is those companies who get paid by the government or who get paid by the prison, because sometimes the prisons are private companies, I would say, and to get the larger benefit, you know, they give the poorer recipes and poorer ingredients to make their food. While even with a little bit of money, they can do something a bit better.
Yeah, totally. I know. Yeah, and I think I started going into prison kitchens because I didn't even really know how it worked, because there is a real lack of information about it. And I started to go in and I realized, number one, in the UK, we have one contract with one supplier for the whole prison service. And like you say, that means that this supplier is given this really, really small budget and said, okay, go and source the ingredients and sell them to prisons, basically. And as a result, those ingredients are much worse quality than what we're used to eating on the outside. So I guess the way I describe it is that catering teams in prisons are automatically at a disadvantage, and they have to work those ingredients a lot harder to get a good dish at the end of it. It is possible, it really is, but it requires some passion and attention to detail and time and effort and leadership. And for the most part, catering managers who I work with on a daily basis, they don't have space for that, you know, in their job. So, yeah, that's kind of the issue, I suppose.
So you visited the prison kitchen, and you've seen also prisoners working in the kitchen, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly.
So, you had the conversations with them?
Yeah, 100%, like from day one. And as I say, a lot of prisons that I went to, you know, I was taken down onto the wing. I have to be honest, pretty much only up until last month, and I'll explain that in a minute, but every single prison I've ever gone into and every single prison I've ever spoken to, when I tell them what I'm there for, I run a charity, we are trying to improve the food. I mean, I'm pretty much met with like positive, like, thank you, you know, like, I've never had any issues with anyone I've met. Most people I meet will say, thank you so much for doing, you know, for raising awareness around this or trying to change things.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, sorry, no, because I know about it also. What is the kitchen? I worked in the kitchen in prison, you know, and the hygiene is not very, very good sometimes. Have you noticed that there is hygiene problem?
Yeah, the hygiene problems, to be honest, happen on the servery, on the wing, because for the most part, I mean, it's hard to say. Every kitchen's run differently, right? Like, I was in HMP Brixton on Monday. which is a very tough prison, but they have a fantastic catering team and prison kitchen. And, you know, I go into that kitchen and it's spotless and it runs like clockwork. So that's not the norm, you know, but the serveries are often where the issues are in British prisons, because suddenly the food is out of the hands of the guys in the kitchen and it's in the hands of the officers and whoever's working on the servery that day. And yeah, it can get pretty chaotic and messy quite quickly.
Exactly. And what did I want to say? But did you, because you know, I've been to prison in England also. I don't know if I told you
Yeah,
that.
I remember you told me before.
Yeah,
Where were you?
Yeah, I was at Scrubs, Wormwood Scrubs. You've been there?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
yes.
a shithole.
The food's not
Let me tell you
either.
that story. I always say it, you know, that story, you know, in my podcast. You know, they send me this, you know, I didn't stay long. They send me to the C wing. It's the wing for drug addicts, because you know, yeah, and they put me on the bottom of the wing, you know, on the right, and they put me with a white guy, white guy, drug addict, but you know, white trash, you know, in England you have those white trash. Sorry, nothing racist or whatever, just to make people understand. And he had tattoos on his fingers. It was the first time I was talking with people with tattoos on the fingers.
Oh yeah.
And he was completely fucked up, to be honest, like real drug addict. And he had, and nighttime he had like epileptic fits. You know, and one night he had a very, very bad epileptic fit. So I banged the door, I called the screws, and they come, and instead of putting him in a security position, they thought that he was like joking or making some, you know, something not real. They bring him down from his bench, they put him on the floor, they beat him up, they open his face, blood everywhere, and they kick. I never seen him since that day.
Wow.
And then a few days later, they bring me a Jewish guy from Israel. Okay, he's 62 years old and he did political science. He did like big studies, political science.
Wow.
Sciences Po is called in France. In France, he speaks very well French, and like a real, you know, conservative Jew with all the things, you know, like really proper religious Jew, and very interesting guy. And why he went to prison? Because he had weed, you know, cannabis business in Israel, and he wanted to expand his business. So he asked a British bank to give him a loan, and the British bank refused the loan. So he got upset. He flew from Israel to London. He went to his house. He took his 2 Rottweiler. He went to see his bankers, and he threw the dog on his banker.
That is insane.
but look at the story. And he was with me, and every day the rabbi used to come in our cell, you know, to talk and to do the prayer with him. And the rabbi was bringing him food from outside, like the kosher food, like very nice, you know. And also, what I discovered in England when I was in prison is that very different than France. That you have religious food. You have the veggies.
Well, do you know what? I've recently
please, because we don't have it.
Okay, because I've recently come back from Scandinavia. I was there for a month in prisons in Denmark and Finland and Sweden, and they also didn't cater to religious diets. And I'm just so used to in the UK. I mean, look, I'm not here. I don't think our prison food is good, right? But I think it's great that, you know, we have to have a halal choice on the menu. Kosher, like you say, the meals come in from the outside. That's why a lot of people, inverted commas, convert to Judaism when they're in prison, because they think the food's better because it's coming in from the outside and whatever.
But they fake convert.
They fake convert, yeah.
They fake convert.
The rabbi has to come and visit them to kind of come and think, are they a real Jew or not? And yeah, so the fact of the matter is, I don't even think the meals are that much better quality, but the fact that they're not made by the prison, I think people think that they are. And but yeah, I was in Scandinavia and I was meeting in Sweden these kind of Muslim prisoners who said we've had to eat vegetarian for like 2 years, you know, because and even things like, again, in Sweden, because I mean, look, if you're lactose intolerant in the UK, like you know, you have a meal without lactose that's made for you.
We have.
And over there, it was like they didn't use much. It was low dairy in their meals, And then they gave people the lactose intolerance pills to, I thought, yeah, I don't know. But then the downside, to be honest, Annie, and don't get me wrong, I think it's great that we cater to those religious diets. We have to, because we have a very high Muslim population, for example, particularly in prison. And, you know, places like Finland, you know, don't have as many. But what I would say is that what that means is I see it in the prison kitchen, that catering teams are cooking 5 choices for lunch, 5 choices for dinner. They're doing special diets. They're doing halal. They've got 8 different wings to feed. And it almost is like the admin involved in that, it takes them away from just making a really good plate of food. And what I saw in Scandinavia, for instance, is that there were less choices. They didn't cater to all these specific things. They just made 2 meals a day, 1 meat, 1 vegetarian, and they were really, really good. And no one really complained about not having much choice. And I don't know.
But you've seen what I was doing. You know, I could bring meat, halal meat from outside. I could bring all the spices. You know, we used to eat really, really, really well in prison.
Well.
You know. Yeah, we used to eat very well. Also, the canteen was very good. We had also the religious diet. But the problem with the kitchen and the catering in the prison in France, because most of the population, we have a big Muslim population, especially in prison, but there is no halal meat. Yeah, there is no halal meat.
But people...
It's the same for everyone.
And what are they... I mean, surely, like, people are pissed off.
The people are pissed off, but they are used to it, and they eat. For example, Friday we eat fish every Friday, like the Christians do. You know, like the Christians deal on Friday, like everybody eats fish. But no, it's politics. You know that there's a big problem with the Islamic religion in France. You know, so.
Yeah, and I think when I was in Scandinavia, I started thinking about the UK, and you know, we've had a big Muslim population for a very long time. You know, it's not a new thing. It might have increased, and you know, we're very used to in society to catering to different kind of religious diets. And I guess I looked at places like Denmark, and I thought, you know, perhaps you're not. You know, perhaps you're kind of trying to keep up with that. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's good to offer people choice. I think you get so many choices stripped away from you in prison. But sometimes on a prison menu in the UK, the choice is 5 different sandwiches with 5 different fillings. And I don't even think that's a choice, really. It's
but because I follow some people in prison. I have friends also in prison. I consider them like as friends. You know, in prison in the UK, and they cook themselves their own dishes, but in the kettle.
Yes. Yeah.
So what do you think about kettle cooking? And I would like to say something. Is it healthy? Because, you know, kettle is plastic, you know, you heat it up, you get all these plastic micro things, you know?
Yes.
So what do you think about kettle cooking?
I've never thought about it from that side of things before, and it probably isn't healthy. But like, if I think about prisons in the UK at the moment, like in terms of how many things are not healthy in prisons, you know, I think probably the kettles are the least of their worries. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's like, I mean, there was a report out yesterday about HMP Bedford. They have a rat infestation, cockroaches. They have pigeons watching you in the shower. They have sewage running along the floor, mold, wet water. You know, I mean, it's Dickensian. But kettles, for me, it's one of those things. It's really weird. Like, kettle cooking is allowed in prisons, but officers can't encourage it, you know, but they also can't ban it, you know. So it's this really weird grey area. And for me, kettle cooking is just a part of prison life. I think even if the food was amazing, people would still cook in their kettles because, you know, I think you summed this up. I remember when we spoke on the podcast, you said, you know, it's about the pleasure. And I think it depends on what relationship you have with food before, right? But if cooking has been part of your life, you're not just going to stop that because you're in prison. You're going to find a way to do it. I would be 100% cooking in my kettle. Like, yeah. I think it's a shame that we have so limited equipment in the UK, and that is their only opportunity for the most part to cook. and they have a kettle, they have some plastic cutlery, they have some Tupperware. They might have taken some stuff from the prison meal, so they might have washed off the chicken and shredded it from the casserole. And then they bought things on Canteen. And I mean, to be fair, Canteen has quite a wide range of products. You can't get fresh products, you couldn't get meat or anything like that, but you can get some vegetables, you can get fruit, eggs, rice, spices, coconut milk. So, there's stuff that you can do, and people do it.
Some kinds of tuna, some kinds of fish also. They sell the kinds of fish, which is good. You get protein. But through your work via Food Behind Bars, did you see progress? Did you have an impact on the? What was the impact you brought on enhancing the dishes, and the food in prison? I would say.
Yeah, so I think we're at quite a turning point, to be honest, because I would say the last 3 years of being a charity, prisons are so complicated, and prison food is such a hard, challenging area that I feel as though we have almost just been testing what works, right? And I feel like now we're in a really good spot. We've kind of got plans to go ahead and almost roll out what we want to roll out. But we did a project at a men's prison in Yorkshire that kind of wrapped at the end of last year. And that was our first project where we were actually influencing the food on the menu. And we had a dish on every lunchtime and every dinner that was a Food Behind Bars dish, and it was developed by us. And I'd recently taken on a development chef who now she's worked for me now for 3 years. And that was a real game changer for me, because I'm not a chef, and to have someone on board to offer that expertise. And so we just had a dish on the menu that was ours. It was healthier, it was more interesting. I had a baker who was working for me who taught the prison how to make their own bread. So we managed to replace all the shitty white processed loaves with homemade bread, which was really, really good and had a positive impact. And we were teaching people in the kitchen how to bake and how to cook as well. And we've had so much positive response from our work, and it's humbling, the amount of prisoners who've come up to me and said this is the best meal I've ever had in prison, or I haven't had an opportunity to cook in 5 years, and just being able to get into the kitchen. But I feel like we're at this cusp where what I want is for that really convincing statistic, right, that through our work, we've managed to decrease violence, we have managed to decrease the mental health incidents, and we haven't got to that point yet, but I feel like we will.
And did it have an impact on the government, to increase the budgets for the catering companies? Because those catering companies are global companies, most of them, and they make billions a year. So why? Do you know this company? Did you talk with some people from those companies, CEOs?
Yeah, I have had conversations. I mean, I'll be very honest with you. I have found you've got prisons, and then you've got the people above prisons, right? We're talking about government. We're talking about, in this country, the Ministry of Justice and things like that. We're talking about the supplier. I found that really challenging. They don't particularly like me, to be honest, Annie. And I think it sounds so petty. I think it's like anything. When I say this to people, they're like, "Oh, that means that you're doing your job, right? You're doing something right." But for me, it's like they seem to they don't want the heat on them. They don't want someone highlighting that there's a problem and that they're responsible. And from my perspective, I've met with these people before, and they have admitted to me that there's a problem. And actually, when we talk, we have a very similar vision. But in practice, I don't think people want to put their neck on the line, increasing food budgets. Our government are very scared about things like that and how they end up in the media. Politicians, we need to reform all our prisons in the UK, and no political party will put that at the front of their manifesto, because people won't vote for it, unfortunately. So I'm hoping, for me, that the way that we generate change, and I would love higher budgets and all of those things, is through action,
But
yeah.
excuse me, Lucy, because very interesting what you say, because they don't understand that if they I wouldn't say that if they make the prison life better, but if they enhance, and they make the food better, people will get like less mental health problem, and the society when they go out, it will be less problems and less crimes.
I
Maybe
think they know it all, and I
they
think
know
they're
it.
presented with the facts on a daily basis. And I think there's
Okay.
been a lot of studies in this country.
Okay.
There was a massive study that was done 25 years ago that showed that nutritional supplements decrease violence in prison by like 40%. I think they know it. I just think they almost don't want to admit it, or I don't know. I spend a lot of time just on the ground in prison kitchens with prisoners and catering managers, and for me it's very obvious that it's not working. I think maybe for people in like central government or whatever, and they do go into prisons and things like that, but I think they have a slightly blinded view, and we have a political party who are not giving the money to prisons that they need, and I don't know.
I think they understand the governments, and the politics understand it, but also I think it's more the public opinion who
Yeah, I
don't
agree.
understand. The public opinion, they have their view. It's a narrow view about it, and they will not change. Maybe they are those one who people like you need to educate in some ways.
I really feel, I mean, I spoke a bit about, 8 years ago when I first went on the BBC and I had all these horrible comments. Things have changed massively. As a charity, we've really felt it. We don't really get those comments anymore. It's more often I come across someone, people, 80% of people who engage with our work will say, 100% food forms part of rehabilitation. This needs to change. I totally believe in what you're doing. I do think actually public opinion's changing. And as an example, I was in the Daily Mail the other week, which is a big tabloid here in the UK, and they've asked me to be in it before a couple of years ago, and I said no, because I started talking to the journalists and it was very obvious that they were going to run with some big headline around how prisons have disgusting food and this girl wants to give everyone Michelin star meal. And I pulled out. I said, no, it's not good for me. It's not good for the charity. I'm not doing it. And I ended up doing this thing that I've done, which was a big interview. And do you know what? We didn't really, I thought it was going to like go viral, and people, I don't know, maybe I'm just a bit skeptical. I thought that there was going to be this wave of like anger, and there wasn't. And that's like, the biggest tabloid in this country pretty much. And for me, one of the reasons I did it is because I thought to myself, the people who read the Daily Mail, they're the people that I want to convince. I don't want to just be preaching to the converted. Like, they're the people who I want to them to understand, the message. So, I agree. Yeah.
So, do you think about getting into politics, maybe, to make things change? Huh?
No,
Because from
I
charity,
mean,
sometimes,
they
you
do. They
derivate to
do.
politics.
Yeah, they do. My problem is that I'm really interested in the small stuff, Dan. Like, I would be
Okay.
the MP who cares about like the bin collections and, whatever. I don't want to get involved in and you know what I love about running a charity, even though it's challenging, is that we have the freedom to work in whatever way that we want to. And I think that's also why sometimes people I've met, in government, who are responsible for prisons, I think they feel like their hands are tied a little bit. I actually think they wish that they could do more, and there wasn't so much red tape and politics and opinions. So I feel really, really lucky that I get to, we've got a mission that we want to do, and we get to just do it, basically.
But if I may say, Lucy, because I know people like you that get intervene into prisons, to teach, to teach, to teach stuff to the people, to try to enhance, prison life. But did they change, nationally their dishes now, or it's more like a government prison and you cannot get into the private ones? Did they start to do something, or it's just
I mean, the kind of good thing about the way that prisons run in this country is that the governors have the autonomy. They have the power. They're in charge of their budgets. They are pretty much in charge of most decisions that affect their prisons. So we have several projects running and projects coming up that all of them pretty much have come through whoever's in charge of that prison, and we're working with one prison at the moment, HMP Wood Hill, which is just outside of London. It's a high security men's prison, very difficult prison, highest rates of violence and self-harm in the country. And the governor contacted us like a year ago and said, our food's not good. We really need some help. And we've come on board and we're now working with them. We're in there in 2 weeks' time running several days of training, and we've developed new recipes for them. Which is great, but it's very hard because, I mean, as an example, this particular prison, like, nothing's being made from scratch. Everything is coming out of packets and boxes. There's like 20 prisoners working in the kitchen who are just cleaning or unpacking things. No one's cooking. So it's not a good vibe in the kitchen. And so we're trying to start small, but we're trying to get them to cook from scratch and get the prisoners to cook. If I can achieve those two things, then it will make a big difference. Yeah.
And did you had like did you had like some you told me you stayed in contact with someone that was a prisoner, a lady. So she came out, did she get into the cooking business, or did she have like some trainings or some?
Yeah, she didn't. She now works actually in the charity sector, but food is a massive part of her life. And she has like an allotment where she grows her own food. So she grows all sorts of fruit and vegetables. She makes her own like fizzy wines and all sorts like liqueurs and all sorts of things and jams, and she's like the definition of like the good life, basically. She's been able to come out of prison and take that negative experience and use it as a tool.
Sometimes I say often, prison is not a waste of time. It's a gain of time, because sometimes you face your own reality, and you change in yourself. Bon, you cannot change human nature, that's for sure, but you can, make it a bit better. So what I want to say, qu'est-ce que je voulais dire? Sorry, I just lost my line. Yes, voilà. What do you think in a men's and women prison, who eats better? Because women is quite difficult, because I know I've been in prison with and I met women in prison also when I was to the long term sentences prison, and it's not really easy for them because they don't practice much gym, so they get on weight, most of them, So you think that men's cook better than women?
I mean, it's impossible to say. What I would say is that you're right. I often find that men tend to lose weight and women tend to gain weight. And I know that many female prisoners that I know, we've been working at women's prison for a year. I know they'd agree with me. And so that's the case. I would say with women's prisons, because they're smaller, the average size of a men's prison in this country is like 800 people. The average size of a women's prison is perhaps more like 200. And I find that it's not always the case, but the smaller the prison, often the food is slightly better because there's less mouths to feed. We're talking about mass production. Like Wormwood Scrubs has 1,500 people in it. So like the food is not good, and it's not that of course it's possible to make good food for 1,500 people, but it's harder, it's logistically more challenging. So I find with women's prisons, that tends to have an influence. Some women's prisons in this country have communal dining, you can eat together. So yeah, but it's not great across the board. And as I say, women, they react in a different way to the food. They buy lots of chocolate off canteen. This is a huge generalization, but someone like Sophie will vouch for that. She just got herself into a bit of a hole. And regarding your charity, so what is the next step? Are you planning also
to grow? How many people
Right.
works for the
Yeah.
charity? How
So
many
at the
people works?
moment, I have 3 people working for me, but I'm about
As
to
a,
take on.
how do you say
Go
when
on.
you work without salary? How do you say
Volunteer. Yeah. No.
volunteer?
So
Ouais, volontaire.
they're not. No. So they are on the payroll. They are
Okay,
employed. We're about to start 2 new projects, one at a men's prison in the Midlands, which is a year-long project, and a project in Manchester Prison where we're running a cooking course on the wings because they've put
okay,
in kitchen facilities. So I'm about to take on 3 new staff. What's next for us is that I really want to scale our work. So, I want to work with every single prison in this country. And I think it's taken us to this point to try and figure out how we would do that and what that would involve. So yeah, I mean, without revealing too much detail, but we
okay.
are we're developing like a prison food education program for prison kitchens, and the goal of it is that it's something that we can build and develop and offer to all prisons alongside our practical kind of help as well and support. But the aim of it is basically to take catering teams, both staff and prisoners, and train them, inspire them, empower them, and to make good food. And I think my biggest learning over the last few years of running projects in prisons is that, often we've been brought in to run the project and then it ends after a year and we go and stuff goes back to normal. And the best stuff I've seen happen in prisons and prison kitchens actually comes from the people inside it. It doesn't come from me or whatever. So we're trying to work with the staff and the prisoners and the people in there who have a tough job, and just try and excite them and train them and teach them how to make good food and support them.
And
Yeah.
sorry, Lucy. And in the
Yeah.
near future, when you're gonna grow, when you will grow, would you, I will say, employ people from prison? When they get free.
I have,
Ah,
Danny. So
when they get free, okay, okay,
well, it was a really unique situation, but we have been running a butchery course at a women's
fantastic.
prison in south east of the
Ah,
UK.
so, okay.
And it's a women's prison. It's an open prison, and it has a farm on site, and they rear their own meat. It's amazing. And they have a farm shop they sell to the public. And we started running this butchery course then, and I'd employed someone to run it. And for various reasons, he left after the first few months. And so I needed to hire someone. And we had a woman who had been on our first course. She was an ex-chef. She'd worked in restaurants in London, and she took to it really quickly. And it was a hard job to fill. And I said to her, I was like, would you be interested in applying? And because it's an open prison, I don't know what it's like in France, but people can gain employment and go out into the community. So I checked it with the governor. I was like, I don't know if we can do this. And she said, oh, I don't see why you can't. And she's been working with me now for almost a year. And she is released in the beginning of April. And we've managed to get her a job on the outside as well. So working for me part-time and working for a butcher's in London part-time. And so when she comes out, she has a job to go to, a full-time job.
Incredible what you said, because I've been in contact with someone who just came out of jail, English guy. He was in a very, very hard crime, very bad crime. He was called the Butcher of Surrey.
Okay, say no more.
and I proposed him to get in touch with you.
Oh, great. Give my email.
So he can do some butchery business with you.
Another butcher. You know what?
Would you be interested to get in touch with him?
Of course. Put him in touch with me.
Of course. But don't give him a sharp knife around you, huh?
I honestly, Danny,
I'm joking.
So the girl that works for me, she's just amazing. I can't wait for her to come out. And she has been the best employee I could ask for. Like, she has grown so much. And when I first started the charity, because as a charity, you have to have a board of trustees, I wanted ex-prisoners on my board. but the charity commission in this country, if you have a criminal record, it's pretty difficult for you to come on, whatever. So I would love to be able to, either employ ex-prisoners like I have done, or, have a separate board, a more informal board of, because, those are the people that guide our work, basically. So, yeah, that's what it's about.
You need to a background check, when you employ some people, because sometimes they've done some crimes that, you cannot accept it as a human being, someone who killed, someone who touched some kids,
Of course.
So what is your point of view? Is that because sometimes you face people who raped kids, to be honest, sorry to be straight, but what is your reaction to that?
I think it's a good conversation to have. Like, we are currently running a project in a men's prison in this country that houses sex offenders and sex offenders only. And the project's gone really, really well. And, obviously I had that question to myself when I considered taking on the project. And people have asked me that question over the years, like, oh, well, yes, prisons should serve better food, but what about the rapists and the people who've murdered people? And, and I guess the only answer I have is that you can't go into a prison saying that some people deserve good food and the others don't. I would never do that. And also, the minute I walk into any prison, and I've always been like this, I never ask people what they've done. Obviously some people tell me and some people don't, and that's fine. I don't really care in that environment. If we're running a cooking course, as long as they show up and engage and want to be part of it, they're in the kitchen, if they're responsible, that's all that kind of matters to me. If I was to employ someone, obviously I would do those checks and things like that. So for me, I also think as well, I don't know if you thought this, but in prison, everyone's you're all there, right? You're all there for a reason. And obviously they're like different reasons, but I think sometimes it becomes a bit irrelevant. I know, obviously, sex offenders are massively discriminated in prisons. And here in the UK, they're kept separate, from other prisoners for obvious reasons, for their own safety. But yeah, from my perspective,
So, Lucy, how do you see your company in the next, I would say, the next 5 years, or your charity? Sorry, how do you see your charity in the next 5 years? It's still in your. You wanna keep going, or you wanna delegate it to someone and go do something else? How do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
I have no plans to delegate. I feel like I'm almost just kind of getting my groove on. I mean, I had a baby, which affected. It's
time consuming.
Exactly, and I feel like now she's a year and a half. I feel like I'm kind of back to it a little bit, but so no plans to do anything else. I think for me, it's about expanding our impact and doing that in a sustainable way. It's really hard to run a charity. It's hard to get funding. It's never secure. So for me, it's how we can secure our future, and also just getting the message out there. I think that was why I started the charity. To generate conversation, generate change.
You were talking about fundings. How do you get your fundings? Who you ask? So there's not much people who would like to pay you. To help.
Well, it's one of those subjects where if people really believe it or have been affected by it, people really get behind it. It's just that I'm not running a charity that is for dogs or young children, Danny, put it that way, basically. So you are right. Like, it's much harder to get donations because it's not an easy sell. And also, like, most people have never experienced prison. So you give to charities that mean something to you, that might have affected you, prison doesn't affect most people. So we we're lucky now in a sense. It's taken a while to get here, but our income is kind of now split. We do get kind of grants from foundations and grant giving bodies and family trusts, and that's probably amounts to about half of our income. And the other half is from the prison service. So we have contracts and we sell our services to the prison service. They have very small budgets for the most part, but actually you'd be surprised. And we've managed to, particularly our education work, we've managed to get ourselves in a good place now where where we've been able to do that. So
And when you get ready to go to work or to visit, to go to work in some prisons, your hubby in the morning, he tells you, be careful, be careful, darling.
He's
What your parents think, also what your parents think. I know, seriously.
You know what? It's so funny because I was in Brixton prison on Monday, and the last time I was there, I was 8.5 months pregnant. It was 2 weeks before I had my daughter, and my mum was like, just stop this now. And she's never said that to me. She was like, please.
She was worried.
She was like, just come on. I was like, no, I've just got to do this one thing and whatever, and then I'm going to stop. I said, everyone's so nice to me. Everyone's pulling out chairs for me, and they were when I was pregnant. I literally, everyone was so polite and kind and considerate. And I never once, I did my own personal risk assessment, right? But and luckily I'm not a prison officer working on the wing. I come and I go, and I feel grateful for that. So
sorry to tell you this, because I know sometimes we have those girls who come to do the things, like social workers, like pretty girls also sometimes they come. No, but really, when you go to a prison like with all the sexual offenders, as a woman, pretty woman, I would say also.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Danny.
You're welcome, Lucy. But it's true, it's true. How do you see yourself? Sometimes you can be like, you have this look. How do you feel? You don't feel any oppressed or something like that?
I don't. I just don't.
Now you're used to it.
Yeah, I'm used to it. I think probably I used to feel a bit more kind of self-aware. I just don't think about. I just think about working with prisoners. I don't stand there and think about who they are and what they've done and what they might think of me. And as I say, I've been very lucky in the sense that I actually found women's prisons harder to work in because I felt like one of them, and I felt a bit more involved in all of the, chaos and gossip and everything that happens. I felt more vulnerable in women's prisons. So I've been really lucky. What I would say is that the prison we're working with at the moment, which is the high security, very violent, very challenging prison, the first time I've actually felt, and do you know what it is? It's really sad, actually. It's just that I keep meeting men there who, most of the time when I say to people, we're going to change the food, everyone's like, great, I've got these ideas, and thank you so much. And actually, these guys have just given up hope because they have no reason to have any hope. And so they're saying to me, you're not going to change anything. No one's going to change anything. No one cares about us. Give up now, kind of thing. And that actually really took me back. And I thought, whoa, okay, like that was the first time I'd had that hostility. So yeah, it is challenging, but I don't ever feel hugely vulnerable.
Big respect to you for that, Lucy. Big round, I appreciate big time. And you know what, Lucy, since we had this conversation, I feel like more close to you, like a friend almost.
I know, me too.
It was quite formal last time we had the podcast.
Was it? I don't really remember.
Like
I had my
journalist.
It was my
like
podcast.
A proper journalist.
I know, and I have
so
my
now
producer.
It's more friendly, I guess.
Yeah, of course. No, absolutely.
And I'm happy to know you. You're doing great. And I don't know if you listen to. No, I don't. You don't have time for that probably. But in a few podcasts I've been on James English podcast. I have been talking about you. About.
Oh really? You have to send me the link.
I talked about you on Delinquent Nation, and I don't know if I sent you a message, but I forgot probably. Yeah. I told you I would like I would like my friend his name is SP. He runs a podcast called Delinquent Nation, and he talks about people who've been in prison and their experience, their crime, etc. But I say you should invite Lucy because she has this charity called Food Behind Bars. She runs also a podcast, and she has really interesting things to say about prison food. So
brilliant.
I will hook you up with SP from Delinquent Nation, and then he invite you. Are you in London, isn't it?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Yeah, he's in London. His studio is in London, Tottenham.
Okay, cool, so amazing. That sounds great. You can invite
on his studio, and you're gonna be. Yeah, you can also, talk about your charity in some good podcasts. Also, he has like lots of views. And I would like to say, what about your podcast? What's going on with it?
I know. Well, I only ever did one series.
Okay.
And I feel a bit like, because it was with a production company and they kind of came aboard for one series. So there's never really any plans to do another series.
Okay.
But I would like to do the series. I feel like it told the story of prison food. I wanted to create something that people could listen to and they could understand every single part of prison food in this country and tell the story. I do think there could be a follow-up, and particularly about the work that we're doing. So I would like to do another one. Yeah, so maybe.
Let us know. We will promote it, Lucy.
Thank you. Okay, cool.
Would you like to add something? Do you have something to say?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. Apart from thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
You're
Can't wait to listen
welcome.
to it. And
It's a pleasure.
and
It's a
yeah,
pleasure.
it's been so
Very
nice.
nice.
If you're ever over in London, just let me know.
I used to come quite often in London.